Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, we are coming to the end of Mathura Lila. By the end of this month, if not sooner, we will begin the final Lila section of Dwaraka. Because Krishna Lila is in 3 divisions. We began with Vrindavan Lila, now we're in Mathura Lila, and it ends with Dwaraka Lila. Last week, we finished up with King Muchukunda. We heard the prayers of King Muchukunda that he offered to Krishna. And then we saw how Krishna blessed Muchukunda, that in his next birth he would be a perfect Brahmana. And Krishna blessed him that he would always remember Krishna and never forget him. So now we start off, this section is called Muchukunda Aftermath. When Muchukunda, the celebrated descendant of the Ikshvaku dynasty, was thus favored by Lord Krishna, Muchukunda circumambulated Krishna within the cave and then came out. Upon coming out of the cave, Muchukunda saw that the human species had surprisingly been reduced in stature to pygmy size, and similarly, the trees had also been far reduced in size. And so Muchukunda could immediately understand that the current age was Kali Yuga. Now, just some clarification. Technically, it was not Kali Yuga because there are several direct references in the Srimad Bhagavatam which says that Kali Yuga actually began the day Krishna left planet Earth and went back home, back to Godhead. But for Muchukunda, basically for him, since he had been around previously, to him, he could see that practically it was Kali Yuga. Technically, it was the last end of Dwarapara Yuga, because as I just said, Kali Yuga begins the moment Krishna went back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, while diverting his attention, without diverting his attention, Muchukunda began to travel north. Eventually, Muchukunda reached the mountain known as Gandhamadana, where there were many trees, such as sandalwood and other flowering trees, whose fragrance made anyone who reached them joyful. The name Gandhamadana indicates a place of delightful fragrances. Undoubtedly, Gandhamadana was filled with the aroma of wild flowers and forest honey, and with other natural scents. Muchukunda decided to remain in that Gandhamadana mountainous region to execute austerities and penances for the rest of his life. It appears that this place is situated in the northernmost part of the Himalayan mountains, where the abode of Narayana is situated. This place is still existing and is called Badarik Ashram. So if you want to know more about this Gandhamadana, there are references to it in the Mahabharata as well as in Srimad Bhagavatam. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are a few episodes which indicate various pastimes of this Narayana. Later on, when we get to the end of this Krishna book, we will come to know that this Narayan actually incarnated as Krishna and Arjuna. But we'll wait till we read about that in at the end of our Krishna book classes. In Badarik Ashram, Muchukunda engaged himself in the worship of Lord Krishna, tolerating all kinds of pains and pleasures and the other dualities of this material world. So this point of tolerating various kinds of austerities and penances, Prabhupada mentions elsewhere in many of his purports that unless there is austerities and penances, one will not be able to make any kind of spiritual advancement. Now you may ask, what kind of austerities and penances? So, the chief penance and austerity that one has to perform, first of all, is humility and tolerance, which is the fundamental teaching of Lord Chaitanya. And one must chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra regularly, daily. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And another big austerity is the observance of Ekadashi, which Vaishnavas observe twice in a month, on the 11th day of the dark moon and the bright moon. So if you regularly practice Ekadashi, you are doing very sufficient austerities and penance. And if you chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, you are also executing austerities and penances. Now we go to the next section. This one is titled Ranachor. Let's hear this episode. Lord Krishna next returned to the vicinity of Mathura, where Krishna had fought with the soldiers of Kalayavana and killed them one after another, because we remember that Krishna did not fight Kalayavana right away. In fact, Krishna walked away from Kalayavana, and Kalayavana followed Krishna into the cave, and then Kalayavana kicked the sleeping man, and Muchukunda burnt Kalayavana to ashes. So now, Krishna had to deal with the soldiers of Kalayavana. After this, Krishna collected all the booty from the dead bodies, and under Krishna's direction, it was loaded onto bullock carts and brought back to Dwaraka. Meanwhile, because remember, before this 18th battle, because previously we heard that Jarasandha had fought Krishna 17 times, and on this 18th attack, Krishna decided to protect the devotees of Mathura. So Krishna created Dwaraka, and you might recall how I mentioned that all the residents of Mathura, they went to sleep at night, and when they woke up, mystically they had been transported to Dwaraka. So now, as it says here, meanwhile, Jarasandha attacked Mathura for the 18th time, this time with bigger divisions of soldiers numbering 23 Akshauhinis. Sri Krishna wanted to save Mathura from this 18th attack of the great military divisions of King Jarasandha. To prevent further killing of soldiers and to attend to other important business, Lord Krishna left the battlefield without fighting Jarasandha. Actually, Krishna was not at all afraid of Jarasandha, but Krishna only pretended to be an ordinary human being, frightened by the immense quantity of soldiers and resources of Jarasandha. So without any weapons, Krishna left the battlefield. Although Krishna's lotus feet were as soft as the petals of a lotus flower, Krishna proceeded for a very long distance on foot. So Krishna did the same thing to Kalayavana. When Krishna appeared on the battlefield against Kalayavana, Krishna was also barefoot at that time. So he has been continuing this technique. This time, however, Jarasandha thought that Krishna and Balaram were very much afraid of his military strength, and that is why they were fleeing the battlefield. Jarasandha followed them with all his chariots, horses, and infantry. Jarasandha thought Krishna and Balaram were simply ordinary human beings, and Jarasandha was trying to measure the activities of Krishna. So, for me, whenever I am reminded of this incident, I always laugh, because Krishna had already defeated Jarasandha 17 times. And as you might recall from our previous classes, each time Krishna killed all of Jarasandha's army, but didn't kill Jarasandha. Why? Because we learned that Krishna's mission was Vinashaya Chaduskritam. Krishna was asked by Lord Brahma to descend in order to kill all the demons who had unnecessarily created a disturbance for Mother Earth by amassing so many demoniac armies. So Mother Earth was very much overburdened by the unnecessary increase of the military armies. So Krishna thought it prudent that by killing only his army and not killing Jarasandha, Jarasandha would immediately gather another army of demons, and Krishna would have an opportunity to kill them wholesale. So it was very prudent that Krishna did this 17 times. And you would think, at least I think, that after being defeated 17 times, you would have learned your lesson. There is an expression that's used quite often, that what is the definition of idiocy? The definition of idiocy is that you repeatedly do the same thing and still get the wrong result. That's called stupidity. That you repeatedly do the same thing thinking, oh, the next time it will come out right. Just like if you repeatedly calculate 2 plus 2 equals 5, you can do it for a million times. It's never going to come out right. So I always laugh at this Jarasandha. 17 times Krishna defeated him. And now he thinks, oh, this time now Krishna's afraid of me. Let's continue. Krishna is known in this pastime as Ranachora, which means one who has left the battlefield. In India, especially in Gujarat, there are many temples of Krishna known as temples of Ranachoraji. Ordinarily, if a king leaves the battlefield while fighting, he is called a coward. But when Krishna enacts this pastime, leaving the battlefield without fighting, Krishna is worshipped by the devotee. A demon always tries to measure the opulence of Krishna, whereas a devotee never tries to measure one's own strength and opulence, but always surrenders unto Krishna and worships Krishna. By following in the footsteps of pure devotees, we can know that Krishna, Ranachorji, left the battlefield not because Krishna was afraid, but because Krishna had some other purpose. The purpose, as it will be revealed, was to attend to a confidential letter sent by Rukhmani, Krishna's first future wife. So now we begin the Rukhmani pastimes. I hope our friend is in attendance today, because ever since we began, He has been expecting this Rukhmani lila. Here we are. It's now starting. Hare Krishna. Krishna's leaving the battlefield is but a display of one of Krishna's 6 opulences. Krishna is the supreme powerful, the supreme wealthy, the supreme famous, the supreme wise, and the supreme beautiful. Similarly, Krishna is the supreme renouncer. In this connection, I recall another example of Krishna's supreme renunciation, and that was the night of the rasa dance. If you recall, when we studied the 5 chapters of the rasa lila, when the rasa dance began, Krishna was dancing with the gopis, and when the gopis became a little proud, Krishna immediately disappeared. And it is explained that the gopis are the most beautiful women in the whole universe. So Krishna is not attached. And in the same Rasa Leela section, right after that, Krishna even renounced Radharani. So, Krishna is definitely the supreme renouncer. Prabhupada continues. Srimad Bhagavatam clearly states that Krishna left the battlefield in spite of having ample military strength. And I would add that he already defeated Jarasandha 17 times. Even without his militia, Krishna alone would have been sufficient to defeat the army of Jarasandha. Here it is, as Krishna had done 17 times before. So Prabhupada agrees with my understanding. Therefore, Krishna's leaving the battlefield is an example of Krishna's supermost opulence of renunciation. After traversing a very long distance, Krishna and Balaram pretended to become tired. To mitigate their weariness, they climbed up a mountain many miles above sea level. This mountain was called Pravarshana, due to constant rain, for the peak was always covered with clouds sent by Indra. And we know one of Indra's names is Meghavan, the possessor of clouds. And this was demonstrated in Vrindavan when Indra tried to devastate the residents of Braja because Krishna had convinced them not to do the annual Indra Puja. And so Krishna had told the Vrajavasis that they should instead worship Govardhan Hill, the cows, and the Brahmins. And Indra became very mad and sent the Samvartaka clouds, the clouds of devastation, to punish Vrindavan. But of course, Krishna lifted Govardhan Hill, holding it for 7 days and 7 nights like an umbrella, and thus protecting the Brajavasis. And Indra realized who he was dealing with. Jarasandha took it for granted that the 2 transcendental brothers were afraid of his military power and had thus hidden themselves at the top of the mountain. Jarasandha at first tried to find Krishna and Balaram, searching for a long time. But when Jarasandha failed, he decided to trap and kill Krishna and Balaram by setting fires around the peak. Jarasandha therefore surrounded the peak with firewood and set it ablaze. And as the fire spread more and more, Krishna and Balaram jumped from the top of the mountain down to the ground, a distance of 88 miles. Thus, while the peak was burning up, Krishna and Balaram escaped unseen by Jarasandha or his men. Jarasandha concluded that the two brothers had thus burned to ashes, and so there was no need of further fighting. Thinking himself successful in his efforts, Jarasandha left the city of Mathura and returned to his own capital, the kingdom of Magadha. Gradually, Krishna and Balaram reached the city of Dwaraka, which was surrounded by the sea. So this mentality of Jarasandha demonstrates that the conditioned soul, and Jarasandha is definitely a conditioned soul, has 4 defects. All conditioned souls have 4 defects. Those defects are called Brahma, Vipralipsa, Karnapatava, and did I say? So one is imperfect senses. So Jarasandha definitely has imperfect senses because he calculated wrong. With imperfect senses, we make mistakes. This is why we say in English language, to err is human. Yes, I learned that as a child. I don't know exactly the reference, but this is a very common expression. To err, to make mistakes is human. So this is confirmed in the Vedas. Brahma. It's called, you make mistakes due to imperfect senses, Karnapatava. And with those imperfect senses, you try to cheat others, Vipralipsa. And ultimately the conditioned soul falls into illusion, Maya. So the liberated soul is free from these 4 defects: imperfect senses, cheating propensity, illusion, and making mistakes. So Jarasandha is the classic example because he thought Krishna and Balaram had been killed. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Following this, Sri Balaram married Revati, daughter of King Raivata and ruler of the Anarta province. This is explained in the 9th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. So this Anarta province is also considered part of the greater Yadu dynasty because the Yadu dynasty is comprising different clans. So one of them is the Anartas. So here's what we have. King Sharyati begot 3 sons named Uttanabarhi, Anarta, and Budishena. From Anarta came a son named Revata. O Maharaj Parikshit, subduer of enemies, this Revata constructed a kingdom known as Kushtastali in the depths of the ocean. And there he lived and ruled such tracts of land as Anarta, etc. Revata had 100 very nice sons, of whom the eldest was Kukudmi. Taking his own daughter, Revati, Kukudmi went to Lord Brahma in his abode, which is transcendental to the 3 modes of material nature, and inquired about a husband for her. When Kukudmi arrived there, Lord Brahma was engaged in hearing musical performances by the Gandharvas and did not have a moment to talk with Kukudmi. Therefore, Kukudmi waited, and at the end of the musical performances, Kukudmi offered obeisances to Lord Brahma and thus submitted his long-standing desire. After hearing his words, Lord Brahma, who is most powerful, laughed loudly and said to Kukudmi, O king, all those whom you may have decided within the core of your heart to accept as your son-in-law have now passed away in due course of time. 27 Chatur Yugas. What is a Chatur Yuga? A Chatur Yuga is a Satya, Treta, Dwarapa, and Kali. That's 4,320,000 years. That's also called a Divya Yuga. So, Brahma just said, while you were here, Kukudmi, 27 Divya Yugas has already passed. So those upon whom you may have decided are now gone. And so are their sons, grandsons, and other descendants. Why? You cannot even hear about their names. Therefore, O king, you should leave here and offer your daughter Revati to Lord Baladev, who is now present on earth. Balaram is most powerful indeed. Balaram is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose plenary portion is Lord Vishnu. Your daughter is fit to be given to Lord Balaram in charity. Lord Baladev is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and one who hears and chants about Balaram is purified. Because Balaram is always the well-wisher of all living entities, Balaram has descended with all his paraphernalia to purify the entire world and lessen its burden. Having received this order from Lord Brahma, Kukudmi offered obeisances unto him and returned to his own residence. Kukudmi then saw that his residence was vacant, having been abandoned by his brothers and other relatives who were living in all directions because of fear of such higher living beings as the Yakshas. Thereafter, the king gave his most beautiful daughter in charity to the supremely powerful Baladev, and then retired from worldly life and went to Badarik Ashram to please Lord Narayan. After the marriage of Baladev, Krishna married Rukhmani. Rukhmani was the daughter of King Bhishmaka, ruler of the province known as Vidarbha. So just as Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, Rukhmani is the Supreme Goddess of Fortune, Mahalakshmi. Rukhmani Devi is a plenary portion. Now the word plenary means full. That's the meaning of the word plenary, full. Rukhmani Devi is a plenary portion of Srimati Radharani. In childhood, Sri Krishna enjoyed with the daughters of the cowherder men, and in Krishna's adolescence, Krishna enjoyed with the daughters of kings. Similarly, Rukhmani is in Dwaraka, what Radha is in the forest of Vrindavan. In other words, in Vrindavan, Radharani is the chief of all the gopis. I might have mentioned previously that there are two divisions or two political parties of gopis, left wing and right wing. Just like here in America, we have Republicans and Democrats. So, Radharani is the leader of the left wing gopis, and Radharani's chief competitor is Chandravali, and she is the leader of the right-wing gopis. So, in Vrindavan, Chandravali does not get the same kind of attention that Radharani gets. So, Krishna is equal. So, what does Krishna do? So, although Chandravali in Vrindavan is not as successful as Radharani, that Chandravali becomes Rukhmani, the first wife of Krishna. She is, and as we will find out later, that Krishna only married 16,108 wives. That's all. And of all the wives of Krishna, Rukhmani is the first and the best of them all. So as it is said here, similarly, Rukhmani is in Dwaraka, what Radha is in the forest of Vrindavan. According to the authority of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the expansion of Krishna and that of Srimati Radharani are simultaneous. Krishna expands himself into various Vishnu Tattva forms, and Srimati Radharani expands herself into various Shakti Tattva forms by her internal potencies as multi-forms of the goddess of fortune. So, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is explained by the author, and Prabhupada just mentioned it briefly here. So Krishna expands. Krishna's first expansion is Balaram, and from Balaram there is the Chaturvyuha, and from the Chaturvyuha there's Narayan, and from Narayan there is the so many avatars and incarnations, and from so many, and then we have Mahavishnu, Garbhodakshai Vishnu, and Shirodakshai Vishnu, but the origin of them all is Krishna. So in the same way, all the gopis are Radharani's expansions. All the queens of Dwaraka are Radharani's expansions, and all the Lakshmis, consorts of Vishnu, Narayan, are also expansions of Radharani. Prabhupada now comments, according to Vedic convention, there are 8 kinds of marriage. In the first-class marriage system, the parents of the bride and groom arrange the marriage date. Then, in royal style, the bridegroom goes to the house of the bride, and in the presence of brahmanas, priests, and relatives, the bride is given in charity to the bridegroom. Now, besides this, there are other systems of marriage, such as Gandharva and Rakshasa. The Gandharva marriage, by the way, there are a few instances in the Bhagavatam and other places. Gandharva marriage is the boy and girl fall in love and they vow to each other by signifying the syllable Om, and in that way they are married together. There are some examples of that in the Bhagavatam. Krishna married Rukhmani according to the Rakshasa system, since Krishna kidnapped Rukhmani in the presence of Krishna's many rivals like Shishupal, Jarasandha, and Shalva. While Rukhmani was being given in charity to Shishupal, Krishna snatched her from the marriage arena exactly as Garuda snatched the pot of nectar from the demigods. Rukhmani, the only daughter of King Bhishmaka, was exquisitely beautiful. Rukhmani was known as Ruchir Anana, which means one who has a beautiful face expanding like a lotus flower. Devotees of Krishna are always eager to hear about the transcendental activities of the Lord. Krishna's activities of fighting, kidnapping, and running away from the battlefield are all transcendental, being on the absolute platform. And devotees take transcendental interest in hearing about them. The pure devotee does not make the distinction that some activities of the Lord should be heard and that others should be avoided. There is, however, a class of so-called devotees known as Prakrita Sahajiyas, who are very much interested in hearing about Krishna's rasa lila with the gopis, but not about Krishna's fighting with his enemies. The Prakrita Sahajiyas do not know that Krishna's bellicose activities, showing a ready disposition to fight, and Krishna's friendly activities with the gopis are equally transcendental because they are all on the absolute platform. All the transcendental pastimes of Krishna described in Srimad Bhagavatam are relished by pure devotees through submissive oral reception. They do not reject even a drop. So this phrase you will see many times in Prabhupada's books. Submissive oral reception. This is what we do every week. What you are doing is called submissive oral reception. And because you voluntarily, submissively agree to this class, you are getting blessed by Krishna more and more and more. Always remember that. Just by listening to this class, you are getting blessed by Krishna. So, next week, we will hear the details. Prabhupada just gave the summary, very brief summary, of how Krishna married Rukhmani. But in the next couple of weeks, we will get the details. So, if anybody can, get in touch with Sundarji. Next week, he has to attend the class. Otherwise, he's going to miss this episode, which he has been waiting for months. So somehow or other, can somebody inform Sundar, next week, he has to come to the class, because we're not going to do it twice. We're only going to do it once. All right.